The courtroom was filled with hushed whispers, the tension thick in the air. All eyes were on the judge as he prepared to make his next ruling, a stern expression on his face. His name was Judge Thompson, a man known for his sharp wit and no-nonsense approach to the law. Today, however, there was something in the air that felt different, something almost mocking. The defendant, a young girl no older than 10, stood alone in front of the judge. She was dressed in a simple blue dress and held a small leather briefcase tightly in her tiny hands. Her eyes, however, were sharp, scanning the room like a seasoned attorney. She wasn't here to play games. She wasn't here to be treated like a child. But Judge Thompson, glancing at her with a raised brow, couldn't help but smirk. His voice boomed across the courtroom, thick with amusement. "You've got to be kidding me," he chuckled. "What kind of game are we playing today? A little girl, acting as an attorney? This ought to be good." The room fell silent, the other attorneys and onlookers looking on in confusion and amusement. The girl, standing tall and unshaken, looked up at him with a calmness that didn't belong to someone her age. "I assure you, Your Honor," she said in a voice that was firm and measured, "this is no game. I'm here to present my case." The judge let out a loud, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair. "All right, sweetheart. Show us what you've got," he said, gesturing for her to proceed. His voice dripped with sarcasm. But the girl didn't flinch. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers, her small hands expertly shuffling through the documents. She glanced at the judge, then turned to face the rest of the courtroom. "I am here to represent my client, Mr. Jenkins, who has been wrongly accused of fraud. The prosecution has failed to provide sufficient evidence, and I will demonstrate today that the charges against him are baseless," she said, her tone calm and collected. The room was dead silent now. Even the judge's amusement seemed to have evaporated, though he still wore a slight smirk on his face. "Well, well," he muttered, clearly enjoying himself. "Let's see what this little attorney can do." The girl walked toward the podium, her small steps purposeful. She cleared her throat and began to lay out her argument, citing legal precedents and evidence that had been overlooked by the prosecution. With every word she spoke, the confidence in her voice grew. The room, once filled with doubt and amusement, began to feel different. The judge's smirk slowly faded as he realized that what this little girl was saying made sense. Too much sense. Judge Thompson raised his hand, silencing the room, and leaned forward with a look of disbelief. "Are you telling me that a child, barely out of elementary school, knows more about the law than I do?" The girl paused, meeting his gaze with an intensity that could have silenced even the loudest courtroom. "I'm telling you, Your Honor, that I'm a licensed attorney, and I'm here to defend the truth," she said with a certainty that left no room for doubt. The judge blinked, caught off guard. His face flushed slightly as he realized his mistake. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected a child, someone so young, so seemingly innocent, to be an attorney at all, let alone one who seemed to understand the law better than most seasoned lawyers. But now, he could no longer dismiss her as just a little girl playing dress-up. This was no game. And that was when the first bombshell was dropped. The girl, with her unshakable confidence, began to reveal pieces of evidence that nobody had seen coming. She presented a document that had been hidden in plain sight, an overlooked clause in a contract that proved the defendant's innocence. Judge Thompson's eyes widened as he processed the information. "Where did you find this?" he demanded, now genuinely rattled. With a smile that could only be described as knowing, the girl replied, "It wasn't hard to find. You just have to know where to look." The courtroom, once filled with skeptical laughter, was now filled with a heavy silence. The judge's expression shifted from amusement to disbelief. He had underestimated this little girl in a way that was almost too glaring to ignore. And just as he was about to speak, something unexpected happened. A man from the back of the courtroom stood up, his eyes locked on the girl. "Your Honor, I must object. This is clearly not." The girl interrupted him, her voice sharp and steady. "Objection overruled. I have already presented the evidence that proves my client's innocence." The courtroom gasped. The tension in the room was thick as they all watched the scene unfold. The girl, once mocked and underestimated, was now commanding the room. Judge Thompson's face reddened. "This is absurd. Who are you really?" he asked, his voice quieter now. The girl didn't hesitate. "I'm Emma Daniels, and I'm a genius attorney in disguise." The room went silent as everyone processed her words. Emma Daniels, no one had seen this coming. She was the daughter of one of the country's most famous lawyers, but no one knew she had been quietly working on her own cases for years. Today was her first public appearance as a lawyer, and it was clear she had just turned the tide in her favor. But the judge, struggling to accept the truth, did something no one expected. He leaned back in his chair and, in a move of pure disbelief, muttered, This isn't over yet. If you're enjoying this story so far, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel and help us get to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Everyone was still processing the bombshell that had just dropped. Emma Daniels, a young girl barely in her teens, had revealed herself to be a licensed attorney, and not just any attorney, but a genius one. Her ability to dismantle the prosecution's case with ease was something no one had expected, least of all Judge Thompson. As the murmurings in the courtroom grew louder, the judge cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. He slammed his gavel down, signaling for quiet. "Order in the court." Judge Thompson's voice rang out, but it wasn't as forceful as usual. There was a hesitation, a crack in his usual composure. He was a man who prided himself on maintaining control, and Emma had just taken that control away from him. "Miss Daniels," he began, trying to steady his tone, "this is highly irregular. How is it that you're a licensed attorney at your age?" Emma, standing confidently at the podium, smiled gently, unfazed by his question. "It's simple, Your Honor. I've been studying law since I was 6. I've passed all the exams, and I've been working alongside my father for the past few years. You might say it runs in the family." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly stunned. "Your father, who might that be?" "Martin Daniels," Emma replied matter-of-factly. The name carried weight. Martin Daniels was one of the most well-known criminal defense lawyers in the country, a legal legend who had taken down some of the most powerful people in the world. His reputation for winning high-profile cases had made him both feared and respected in the legal world. Emma's answer only added to the growing disbelief in the room. She wasn't just some child pretending to be an attorney. She was the daughter of a legal titan. The judge paused, staring at her for a long moment, trying to wrap his head around the situation. "This is highly irregular," he muttered under his breath. "But we'll continue. The case is still not over. You've only just begun to speak, Miss Daniels." Emma nodded, her expression still calm, and she turned back to the court. The spectators, who had been silent since her revelation, were now watching her closely, their curiosity piqued. She had gained their attention, but she wasn't done yet. "Thank you, Your Honor," Emma said, her voice unwavering. "Now, let me proceed with the evidence I've uncovered." She flipped through her briefcase again, pulling out more documents, new pieces of evidence that had been hidden or ignored by the prosecution. She laid them out methodically, pointing to each one as she explained how it further demonstrated her client's innocence. As she spoke, the courtroom remained hushed, with even the most seasoned attorneys listening intently. Emma's understanding of the law, her ability to connect dots that no one else had noticed, was astounding. She was turning the case on its head, and the prosecution had no choice but to watch helplessly. The prosecutor, a man named Jonathan Graves, who had once been known for his unshakable confidence, was now visibly sweating. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his papers, but he didn't dare interrupt Emma. He knew better. The child in front of him was more than capable of holding her ground. Finally, after what seemed like hours, Emma finished her presentation. She had laid out her case, clear, concise, and irrefutable. Judge Thompson, who had remained silent throughout Emma's argument, finally spoke again. His voice, though still carrying authority, now held a touch of respect. "I must admit, Miss Daniels," he said, his tone grudgingly admiring, "you've presented your case well. However, I need to consider all of the evidence. The court has rules, and those rules must be followed. This is not a simple matter of just presenting evidence. It's about how the law is applied. The law requires certain formalities to be met, and I cannot overlook them." Emma raised her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as she caught the subtle dismissal in the judge's words. She wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but firm, "I understand that the rules of the court must be followed. However, the law is meant to uphold justice, not be a barrier to it. My client has been wrongfully accused. The evidence I've presented is solid, and it clears him of any wrongdoing. The law should serve truth, not bureaucracy." The courtroom fell silent again, everyone looking at Judge Thompson. It was clear that Emma had not only outsmarted the prosecution, she had also just challenged the very foundation of how the court operated. Judge Thompson, his face turning red with a mixture of frustration and admiration, took a deep breath. He looked at Emma for a long moment, then turned to the rest of the courtroom. "We'll take a brief recess," he said, his voice shaky. "This is unprecedented. I need to review the evidence and consult with the legal team before making a decision." As the recess began, Emma gathered her things and quietly walked back to her seat. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The confidence she had shown in court had been more than enough to prove that she wasn't just playing a role. She was the real deal. Outside the courtroom, whispers began to spread like wildfire. People couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. A child had just walked into a courtroom and, in a matter of minutes, turned the case on its head, all while outsmarting a seasoned judge and prosecutor. It was the kind of thing that would be talked about for years to come. But Emma was focused. She had one goal in mind: to win this case for her client. And she wasn't done yet. As she sat quietly in the back of the courtroom, waiting for the judge's return, she couldn't shake the feeling that this case was only the beginning. There were still more challenges ahead, and she was ready for whatever came next. The court reconvened shortly after the recess, and when Judge Thompson returned to the bench, he did something no one had expected. After reviewing the evidence presented, he began, his voice still holding a tinge of disbelief, "I find that the charges against Mr. Jenkins have no merit. The case is dismissed." The courtroom erupted in surprise, but Emma simply stood up, her face calm. She had done it. She had won. But there was one final twist. As the gavel came down, signaling the end of the case, the judge looked directly at Emma and, with a hint of a smile, said, "Well done, Miss Daniels. I must admit, you have earned my respect. But this isn't the last time I'll be seeing you, is it?" Emma's smile was small, but it carried all the weight of someone who knew that the future was wide open, and she was ready to take it on. The courtroom doors swung open, and Emma Daniels stepped out, her briefcase swinging by her side. Her heart was racing, but her expression remained calm, as it always did when she won. Today, the victory was especially sweet. Not only had she successfully defended her client, Mr. Jenkins, but she had also proven to the world, and more importantly to Judge Thompson, that she wasn't just a little girl pretending to be a lawyer. She was a force to be reckoned with. Her father, Martin Daniels, was waiting for her just outside the courtroom. A proud smile stretched across his face. He had been watching from the back, as he often did during her trials, offering quiet support. As always, he let Emma take the lead, knowing that she didn't need his help anymore. She had earned her place in the courtroom long ago. "You did it," Martin said softly, his voice filled with pride. Emma smiled up at him. "We did it," she corrected him, always humble despite her brilliance. "Mr. Jenkins is free. That's all that matters." Her father nodded. "I've been thinking about something, Emma. You've already proven that you're more than capable of handling these cases on your own. But what comes next?" Emma's eyes twinkled with determination. "I want to do more, Dad. I want to change the way people think about justice. I want to prove that the law isn't just for the powerful. It's for everyone." Her father's smile faded slightly as he looked down at her. "You know it won't be easy. There are powerful people in this world who don't want change. They'll fight you every step of the way." Emma nodded, her resolve unwavering. "I know, but I'm ready. And besides, if I don't stand up for what's right, who will?" Her father gave her a tight hug, his pride evident in the way he held her. "I couldn't be prouder of you, Emma. Whatever comes next, I'll be right here supporting you." As they left the courthouse, Emma felt the weight of her future pressing down on her. This case, while monumental, was just the beginning. There were so many other people out there who needed her help, so many injustices that needed to be righted. The victory today felt good, but she knew it was only one step in a much larger journey. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Judge Thompson sat in his chambers, his mind still reeling from the events of the day. He had never encountered a situation like this before. A young girl, a child by his standards, had just walked into his courtroom and dismantled the prosecution's case in ways he hadn't even considered. The entire trial had left him shaken, not because of his decision, but because of how easily Emma had exposed the weaknesses in the system. His fingers drummed on the desk as he thought about what to do next. He had already dismissed the case against Mr. Jenkins, but something told him this wasn't the last time he would cross paths with Emma Daniels. She was a force to be reckoned with, and he had to admit he respected her. But he was also wary. She was so young, yet she had a mind sharper than any attorney he had ever faced. She had a fire in her that he wasn't sure the legal world was ready for. Judge Thompson, his assistant called from the doorway, interrupting his thoughts. "You have a visitor." The judge looked up, slightly irritated by the interruption, but quickly composed himself. "Send them in," he said. A few moments later, a tall man in a sharp suit entered the room. He was well-dressed, with an air of authority that matched his expensive suit. His name was Richard Donovan, and he was one of the most powerful attorneys in the country. His reputation for bending the law to suit his clients was unmatched. "Good afternoon, Judge," Donovan said smoothly, extending a hand. "I wanted to speak with you about today's case." The judge raised an eyebrow, already sensing where this conversation was going. "I've already ruled, Mr. Donovan. The case is dismissed. There's nothing to discuss." Donovan's smile didn't falter. "I beg to differ. You see, Judge, while I respect your ruling, I believe there's more to this case than meets the eye. A child, an unqualified child, just walked into your courtroom and won. Don't you think that sends the wrong message?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I made the wrong decision?" Donovan didn't back down. "Not at all. I'm just saying that we live in a world where legal battles are won with power, influence, and resources. Emma Daniels doesn't fit that mold. She's a threat to the system. A system that we both know favors the wealthy, the influential." Judge Thompson leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepling as he considered Donovan's words. "You think Emma Daniels is a threat to the system?" Donovan's gaze darkened. "She's a disruptor. And disruptors like her, they're dangerous. People like us, people who have worked our entire lives to navigate the system, don't like it when someone like her comes along and threatens to tear it all down. We're not the only ones watching her. You'll see. Soon there'll be others." Judge Thompson took a long, thoughtful breath. "I'm not sure where you're going with this, Mr. Donovan. But I do know one thing. Emma Daniels is a lawyer, no matter her age. She's earned her place. If you or anyone else tries to undermine her work, I'll be the first to stand in her defense." Donovan's expression shifted, his smile turning into something colder. "We'll see, Judge. We'll see how long that stance holds up." With that, Donovan turned and left the room, leaving Judge Thompson to contemplate what had just transpired. The pieces were falling into place, and he could sense that things were about to get more complicated. Emma Daniels had just made an enemy, and not just any enemy, someone with power, influence, and the ability to control the very system Emma was trying to change. The question now was whether Emma, with all her brilliance and drive, was prepared for the storm that was coming. The following weeks passed quickly, but the tension in the air seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Emma Daniels had made her mark in the legal world, but as her reputation began to spread, so did the resistance to her unconventional approach. Some admired her for challenging the status quo, while others saw her as a threat, one that needed to be silenced or controlled. Judge Thompson had been thinking about Emma constantly, replaying the events of the trial in his mind. Her composure, her brilliance, and most of all, her unwavering belief in justice had shaken him. It wasn't just the fact that she had won. He had no doubt that she had earned her victory, but the way she had conducted herself. She wasn't a child playing pretend. She was a lawyer with a purpose, and that purpose wasn't just about winning cases. It was about changing the system. Meanwhile, Emma was hard at work, preparing for her next case. She was determined to keep moving forward, to prove that her success wasn't just a fluke. There were still plenty of people out there who doubted her, who believed that a child had no place in the courtroom. But Emma knew better than anyone that age didn't determine capability. The law, after all, was about logic, reason, and evidence, not about how many years you had been alive. Emma sat at her desk one evening, sifting through legal documents for her next case. It was a civil matter, a property dispute involving a local businessman who had been accused of illegal land grabs. But Emma wasn't interested in the details of the case alone. She was looking for a deeper truth, something that could expose the corruption behind the businessman's actions. She wasn't just interested in winning for her client. She wanted to take down those who were exploiting the system for their own gain. The door to her office opened, and her father walked in, a concerned look on his face. Emma looked up from her work, but the calmness in her eyes didn't waver. "Dad, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. Martin Daniels sat down across from her, his expression serious. "I've been hearing some things, Emma. People are starting to talk. Some of the older attorneys in the legal community are concerned about the attention you've been getting. They don't like what you're doing." Emma raised an eyebrow, intrigued but not intimidated. What exactly are they saying? They're calling you a disruptor, Martin replied, his tone softening slightly as he watched his daughter's expression. That you're breaking the rules, challenging the system, and creating waves that could disrupt the balance of power in the legal world. Emma chuckled, her confidence shining through. Isn't that the point, Dad? The system has been broken for a long time. Why should I just sit back and accept it? Martin sighed, looking at her with a mixture of pride and concern. I didn't raise you to be a puppet, Emma. But I also know that the world isn't kind to people who challenge the status quo. If you keep pushing too hard, you might end up making some very dangerous enemies. Emma's gaze softened as she thought about her father's words. She knew he was right in many ways. She had seen how people in power could crush those who threatened their interests. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the injustice that was all around her. I'm not afraid of making enemies, Dad, she said quietly. I'm more afraid of standing by and letting things continue the way they are. If I can change even one thing, make even one person think differently about the system, then it'll be worth it. Martin leaned forward, his eyes searching hers. I know you're passionate about this, Emma, and I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. But you have to understand the consequences of what you're doing. There are powerful people out there who won't take kindly to a child, no matter how smart she is, trying to take them down. Be careful. Emma smiled, but there was a fire in her eyes. I'll be careful, Dad, but I won't back down. I've already made a difference, and I won't stop now. As Martin left her office, he couldn't shake the worry that had settled in his chest. Emma was more determined than ever, and while he admired her strength and conviction, he knew how ruthless the legal world could be. She was entering dangerous territory, and the enemies she made along the way would not hesitate to strike back. The next day, Emma was back in the courtroom, preparing for her next battle. The civil case she was handling was one of the many she had taken on in the past few months, but this one felt different. There was something about the businessman she was up against that didn't sit right with her. His wealth, his connections, and his ability to manipulate the legal system all screamed corruption. As she reviewed the evidence, Emma knew she had to find a way to expose him. The businessman's arrogance was evident, but it wasn't just his attitude that bothered her. It was the way he used the law to his advantage, bending it to his will without any regard for the people he was hurting. Emma wouldn't let him get away with it. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed with spectators. Emma stood at the front, her briefcase in hand, ready to face her opponent. She had done her homework, and she was prepared to expose the businessman's lies. The prosecution had already presented their case, but Emma knew there was more to uncover. She walked up to the podium, her voice calm but powerful as she addressed the judge. Your Honor, today I stand before you not just as a lawyer representing my client, but as someone who believes in the truth. And the truth, as we know, cannot be hidden behind lies or deceit. The businessman, sitting at the defendant's table, sneered at her. This is a waste of time, he muttered under his breath. But Emma didn't let him rattle her. She had come too far to let anyone intimidate her. She began her argument, presenting her evidence with precision. The room was silent as she detailed the businessman's illegal activities, outlining how he had used underhanded tactics to acquire land that didn't belong to him. She presented documents that were irrefutable, pulling out contracts and photographs that showed his manipulation of the law. As Emma laid out the case, the businessman's arrogance began to fade. His confidence turned to uncertainty as he realized that his actions were being exposed. But just as Emma thought she had him cornered, something unexpected happened. The defense attorney, a well-dressed man who had been sitting quietly at his table, stood up and made an objection. Objection, Your Honor, he shouted, his voice sharp. This evidence is inadmissible. We demand a recess so we can review these documents. Emma paused, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the attorney. She had expected a fight, but this felt different. Something wasn't right. Judge Thompson, who had been quiet up until this point, leaned forward and banged his gavel. Sustained. We will take a brief recess for the defense to review the evidence. Emma's mind raced. This wasn't just a delay tactic, it was something else. The defense was trying to buy time, and she needed to figure out why. As the recess was called, Emma's eyes locked onto the defense attorney. She could feel it in her gut. There was something going on behind the scenes, and she wasn't going to let it slide. Emma sat in the back of the courtroom, her arms folded, her eyes never leaving the defense attorney as the recess continued. The quiet chatter in the room didn't bother her. She was focused. She had been in the courtroom long enough to know when something wasn't right, and the defense attorney's reaction to her evidence had been too quick, too rehearsed. She could feel the tension building in the air. It wasn't just the stakes of the case, it was something deeper. The businessman had been so confident, almost arrogant, when she first presented her evidence. But now he seemed nervous. Emma wasn't going to let him hide behind his legal team's games. She had worked too hard to uncover the truth, and she wouldn't let anything derail her momentum. As she sat waiting for the court to reconvene, her mind flashed back to the previous case, the one with Mr. Jenkins. The relief she had felt when she won that case had been immense, but this one was different. She was up against someone who was much more powerful, someone who could use his wealth and influence to get out of tough situations. But Emma had learned one crucial lesson from her last victory. Knowledge and preparation were her greatest weapons. No amount of money or power could stand against the truth if it was properly laid out. The sound of the gavel snapped her out of her thoughts. Judge Thompson stood at his bench, signaling for the court to reconvene. Emma straightened up, stepping back toward the podium. The defense attorney was already at his table, looking over his notes, but he didn't make eye contact with her. It was as though he was trying to pretend that everything was still business as usual. Judge Thompson's voice rang out. "We are now back in session. The defense has had ample time to review the evidence, and we will continue with the trial. Please proceed, Miss Daniels." Emma nodded, and with one last glance at the defense table, she spoke confidently. "Thank you, Your Honor. As I was stating before the recess, my client has been the victim of an unjust land grab orchestrated by the defendant. The evidence I've presented makes it clear that Mr. Reynolds has been using illegal methods to acquire land that rightfully belongs to others. His attempt to discredit the documents I presented is nothing more than a diversion." At the mention of the businessman's name, Mr. Reynolds' face turned red. He clenched his fists at his side, but Emma didn't let him distract her. She pressed on, continuing to lay out the damning evidence piece by piece. The documents, the photographs, the recordings, it all pointed to one undeniable conclusion. Reynolds had used manipulation and bribery to secure land that he had no legal claim to. The defense attorney stood up quickly, trying to regain control of the situation. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked. "This line of questioning is irrelevant. These documents are incomplete and lack proper verification." Emma raised an eyebrow, undeterred. "Your Honor, the defense has no basis for such an objection. The documents are legitimate, and the evidence is irrefutable. Mr. Reynolds is simply trying to cloud the facts with baseless claims." Judge Thompson turned his gaze to the defense. "Mr. Grant," he began, addressing the defense attorney, "you've had a chance to review the evidence. Do you have anything concrete to offer in terms of counterarguments? Or is this simply a stalling tactic?" The defense attorney, Mr. Grant, seemed to hesitate. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at his notes again, his confidence beginning to wane. I'm simply trying to clarify the credibility of the documents," he muttered. Emma didn't let up. "The documents are credible, Your Honor. I have already provided evidence of their authenticity, including verification from a number of reliable sources. Mr. Reynolds is using legal jargon to obfuscate the truth. The facts are clear." There was a brief pause before Judge Thompson spoke again. "It appears that the defense has no new evidence to present. I am therefore prepared to rule. I find that the defendant, Mr. Reynolds, has indeed engaged in fraudulent activities. The evidence clearly supports the claims made by Miss Daniels, and as such, I am inclined to rule in favor of her client." Emma couldn't help but smile as the judge's gavel came down, signaling the end of the case. "The court is adjourned," Judge Thompson said, his voice now calm but firm. As the courtroom began to empty, Emma gathered her things, her heart racing with excitement. She had done it. She had just taken down one of the most corrupt businessmen in the city. But even as the victory sank in, Emma's thoughts turned to something else. This wasn't over. There was still much more to be done. As she left the courtroom, Emma's father was waiting for her outside. "Well done, Emma," he said, his voice warm with pride. "You've really made a name for yourself today." Emma smiled at her father, but there was a hint of concern in her eyes. "Thanks, Dad. But this is just the beginning. There are still a lot of people out there who think they can use the law to their advantage. And I'm not going to stop until the system is fair for everyone." Martin's smile faltered for just a moment, the worry in his eyes returning. "You've got the right heart, Emma, but I've seen what happens to people who challenge the system. They don't always come out unscathed. Be careful. You've made a lot of powerful enemies, and they won't hesitate to come after you. Emma nodded, knowing that her father's words were coming from a place of concern. But she wasn't afraid. She had been prepared for this moment for a long time. The legal world wasn't going to be easy, and she knew there would be those who tried to stop her, to silence her. But Emma had something they didn't: resolve, intelligence, and an unshakable belief in the truth. "I'm ready, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "And no one is going to stop me." Back in the courtroom, Judge Thompson sat at his desk, still processing the events that had unfolded. He hadn't expected Emma Daniels to be so skilled, so confident in her abilities. He had seen a lot of lawyers in his time, but none like her. She wasn't just an attorney. She was a disruptor, someone who could reshape the entire legal landscape if she chose to. But as much as he respected her, there was a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. Something wasn't sitting right. Emma had just won another victory, but there were whispers behind the scenes, talks of powerful people who didn't like how she was challenging the system. And then there was the name Richard Donovan, the man who had been lurking in the background, the one who had warned the judge about Emma's rise. Donovan was a key player in the world of law, and if he was involved, Emma's road ahead would be even more difficult. Judge Thompson knew he had to make a choice. He could either stand by Emma, continue supporting her, and watch as she changed the world of law, or he could stand in her way and risk being swept aside by the forces she was up against. One thing was certain: this was far from over. The days following Emma's second victory in court were filled with triumph, but also a rising sense of unease. She had become a force to be reckoned with, but as her reputation grew, so did the dangers. The legal world was buzzing with whispers of her brilliance, and while many admired her skill, there were those who viewed her as a threat. The powerful people she was exposing, the ones who used the system for their own gain, were beginning to notice her. And not all of them were happy about it. Emma was sitting in her office late one evening, going over her notes for her next case, when her phone buzzed with a message from her father. Martin Daniels had always been her rock, and while he was proud of her accomplishments, he had been increasingly concerned about the path she was taking. Emma, I need to talk to you. There are things you need to know. Meet me at the office tomorrow. It's important. The message sent a chill down her spine. Her father had always been straightforward with her, but this tone was different, more urgent. Emma's mind raced. What could be so important? Had something changed? Had her latest victory upset the wrong people? She spent the rest of the night trying to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the message. By the time she finally went to bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, a storm she hadn't prepared for. The next morning, Emma made her way to her father's office. It wasn't far from her own, and the familiarity of the walk did little to ease her nerves. The building was tall and imposing, like so many of the others in the city. As she entered, she was greeted by the receptionist, who directed her to her father's office. Martin was sitting behind his desk, his face serious. There was no warmth in his usual smile. Instead, his brow was furrowed with concern. Emma took a seat across from him, her curiosity mounting. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with worry. Martin hesitated for a moment, then pushed a manila folder across the desk toward her. "You need to see this, Emma." She took the folder and opened it. Inside were several documents, most of them related to recent cases she had worked on. But there were other pieces of information as well, documents marked with red stamps, stamped with words like classified and confidential. Emma's eyes narrowed as she read through the pages. "These documents, they're from the city's law enforcement and the prosecution," she murmured. "What is this?" Martin leaned forward, his expression grim. "They're watching you, Emma, and not in the way you think. You've made powerful enemies. These people, the ones you're exposing, they have influence. They're starting to look into your work, and they don't like what you're doing. Some of them are trying to discredit you." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Discredit me? How?" Martin sighed, his voice heavy. "They've been looking for ways to undermine your credibility. They know you're dangerous to them, and they'll stop at nothing to protect their interests. They've already been talking to some of the judges, trying to get your cases dismissed. They're making threats behind the scenes." Emma sat back in her chair, her mind racing. This was worse than she had imagined. She had known she was up against powerful people, but this was something else. She was being targeted, not just by her opponents in court, but by the very system she was trying to reform. "What do I do?" she asked, her voice soft, almost to herself. Martin looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. You have to be careful, Emma. You've been doing things the right way, but now you need to be more strategic. They'll try to discredit you, yes, but they'll also try to silence you. They'll use whatever they can: threats, intimidation, even manipulation. You need to watch your back. Emma's mind was spinning. She had always known that the road she was walking was dangerous, but now it felt more real than ever. Her passion for justice had led her this far, but it had also made her a target. And the more successful she became, the more dangerous things would get. I won't stop, Dad, she said firmly, her voice resolute. I can't stop. People need me. I'm not just fighting for my clients. I'm fighting for a fair system. I'm fighting for truth. I won't let them silence me. Martin looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. I know you won't, but you need to be smart about it. They'll try to use your age against you, to make it seem like you're just a kid playing with the law. Don't let them. Keep your focus. And remember, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'll support you no matter what. Emma nodded, feeling the weight of her father's words. She knew the road ahead would be harder, but she also knew she was ready. She had been trained for this moment, and she wouldn't let anyone stand in her way. As she left her father's office, Emma felt a renewed sense of determination. She had been warned, but she wasn't going to let fear control her. She had a purpose, and that purpose was stronger than any threat they could throw at her. Later that day, as Emma returned to her office, she found a message waiting for her. It was from an unknown number, and the message was short but chilling. Asterisk, stop now. Or else. Asterisk. Emma's heart raced as she stared at the screen. The message was a warning, one that couldn't be ignored. But Emma wasn't one to back down. The more they tried to intimidate her, the harder she would fight. She deleted the message, then pulled out the case files she had been working on. The next trial was just around the corner, and Emma knew she needed to be ready. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, she was prepared to face them. She wasn't going to stop now, not when she was so close to making real change. That evening, as Emma sat at her desk, something caught her eye, a figure in the reflection of her office window. Someone was standing outside, watching her. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned quickly, but the figure was gone, vanished into the shadows. Emma's instincts kicked in, her mind racing. It wasn't just a coincidence. They were watching her, and it was getting closer to a breaking point. The chilling feeling of being watched lingered long after the figure disappeared into the shadows. Emma sat frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. The office was quiet, too quiet. She glanced at the door, ensuring it was locked, then slowly stood up and walked to the window. The city below seemed ordinary, people walking along the streets, cars passing by. But something about the moment made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her own safety. She turned back to her desk, her mind working quickly. The message, the figure outside her window, everything seemed connected. It was as if someone was trying to send her a clear warning, one that was far more serious than anything she had faced before. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how far-reaching this threat was. It wasn't just the businessmen she had exposed. It was the system itself, and the people who had benefited from its flaws for years, perhaps even decades. But Emma wasn't one to back down. She had been trained for moments like this, to face the impossible and challenge the unjust. She refused to let fear control her, even if it meant going head-to-head with the most powerful people in the city. The next morning, Emma met with her father again. This time, there was no hesitation in her step, no uncertainty in her eyes. The warning the night before had only fueled her resolve. I know you're worried, Dad, Emma said as they sat together in his office. But I won't stop. I'm doing the right thing, and I won't let them scare me off. Martin sat across from her, his expression filled with concern but also pride. I know you won't, Emma. But I want you to understand just how dangerous this situation is. They'll try everything they can to push you into a corner, discrediting you, threatening you, even trying to turn people against you. Emma nodded, her voice steady. I'm ready. I've been ready for this. And I won't let anyone stop me from getting to the truth. Martin sighed, running a hand through his hair. You've got the drive, Emma. You always have. But this is different. These people, they won't hesitate. And we're not just talking about a few shady businessmen anymore. You're dealing with people who control things behind the scenes, people who play dirty, people who can make things disappear without a trace. Emma felt the weight of her father's words, but she refused to let doubt take hold. I've already exposed one of the city's most powerful men. They won't get away with this. Her father paused before speaking again. I know you're capable, Emma. But don't forget that there's more at stake now. It's not just your career, it's your safety. You need to take precautions. Emma frowned. She had already thought about this. The threat wasn't just an idle warning, it was real. But she wasn't going to hide from it. I'll take precautions, but I'm not backing down, Dad, she said, her voice firm. I'm not afraid of them. I'm afraid of doing nothing. Martin looked at her for a long time, his face conflicted. He knew how strong Emma was, how much she believed in her cause. But as a father, all he wanted was to protect her. I'll support you no matter what, Emma. But you have to be smart. Keep your guard up. And don't trust anyone blindly. I've seen the way they operate. They'll make sure no one gets in their way, not even you. Emma reached across the desk and placed her hand on her father's. I understand, Dad, and I'll be careful. But we both know that there's too much at stake to stop now. After their conversation, Emma left her father's office with a heavy heart, but also a renewed sense of determination. She was ready for whatever came next. She had always known the road she was on wouldn't be easy, but she was more prepared than ever to face it head-on. Later that afternoon, Emma received a call from an unexpected source, Judge Thompson. She had expected some pushback from him after her victories, but she had never anticipated him reaching out personally. Miss Daniels, the judge's voice came through the phone. I wanted to talk to you about your recent cases. Emma was taken aback. Judge Thompson, what's this about? The judge's tone was measured, his voice low. I've been watching your work closely, and I have to say, I'm impressed. But you should know that the people you're going up against don't play fair. I know you've already been warned, but this is serious. They're coming after you, and you need to be prepared. Emma's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, coming after me? The word on the street is that they're putting pressure on the courts, Judge Thompson said, his voice carrying a rare note of concern. They've already started working behind the scenes to discredit your work. And if that doesn't work, they'll use more extreme measures. I'm not sure how, but I know they'll try something. Emma took a deep breath. This wasn't unexpected, but hearing it from the judge, someone who had always maintained a professional distance, made it feel all the more real. What do I do? She asked. Judge Thompson hesitated for a moment. I can't openly support you in this, Miss Daniels. But I'll give you a warning. Be careful. Watch your back. They won't hesitate to ruin your reputation, or worse, make sure you're out of the picture entirely. You've already stepped on some very powerful toes. Emma clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. I appreciate the warning, Judge. But I've been dealing with threats since I started this. I won't let them intimidate me. The judge was silent for a moment. Just be careful, he said, before ending the call. Emma sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She had known the risks, but hearing them from Judge Thompson made it all feel more immediate. They were not just going after her career. They were going after her very existence in the legal world. But that wasn't going to stop her. If anything, it made her more determined. Later that night, as Emma walked home from her office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Every step seemed to echo in the empty streets, and she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every now and then. Was someone watching her? Was the threat finally catching up? She reached her apartment, locking the door behind her with a sigh of relief. But as she looked around the room, she knew that this was only the beginning. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was about to break, and she had to be ready. The next morning, Emma received another chilling message. This time, there was no warning. No cryptic threats. Just a single line of text. Asterisk, stop now. Or we'll make sure you never practice law again. Asterisk. Emma stared at the message, her hands trembling slightly. But despite the fear that rose in her chest, she refused to back down. She had fought for the truth before, and she would fight for it again. She wasn't going to let anyone stop her now. Emma sat at her desk, staring at the latest message. The words were simple, but the threat was clear. Stop now, or we'll make sure you never practice law again. Her fingers hovered over her phone, her mind racing. She had anticipated that this would get dangerous, but the reality was setting in faster than she had expected. The pressure was mounting, and she could feel it. Her father's warnings echoed in her mind, but there was something deeper now, a gnawing sense that things were spiraling out of her control. The people who had been threatening her, the ones who wanted her to stop, were getting bolder. They weren't just trying to discredit her anymore, they were trying to destroy her career. And if that wasn't enough, She couldn't shake the feeling that they were going to go further. Much further. Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She had come too far, and no one, not even the most powerful figures in the legal world, was going to push her out of the fight. She had to keep going, for herself and for the people she had promised to help. That afternoon, she received a call from a familiar voice, Judge Thompson. Her heart skipped a beat. They hadn't spoken since their last conversation, and something in his tone made her uneasy. "Miss Daniels," he said, his voice quiet but serious, "I think it's time we had a face-to-face meeting." "Judge Thompson, what's going on?" Emma asked, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "I think it's time you know exactly what you're up against," he replied. "Meet me at my office in an hour. It's important." Emma felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't hesitate. She knew that whatever Judge Thompson had to say, it was going to change everything. She grabbed her coat, stuffed her phone into her pocket, and headed out the door. When she arrived at the courthouse, Emma made her way through the corridors, her footsteps echoing in the quiet building. As she reached the judge's chambers, the door opened, and Judge Thompson gestured for her to come inside. He didn't waste any time. "Have a seat, Miss Daniels," he said, his face grim. Emma sat down across from him, her heart pounding. She had never seen him like this, so serious, so guarded. "What's going on, Judge?" she asked again, trying to keep her voice steady. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking at her with a mixture of respect and concern. "You've made some powerful enemies, Emma. I've been hearing things, rumors mostly, but the whispers are getting louder." "Rumors about what?" she asked, her tone sharp. She had a feeling she already knew where this was going, but she needed to hear it from him. "About you," Judge Thompson said, his voice low. "There are people in this city who are not happy with the cases you've been taking on. They want you to stop. And if you don't, they'll do everything in their power to make sure you never practice law again. It's not just about ruining your career. These people want to destroy you. They want to make you disappear." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had known that things were getting dangerous, but hearing it so plainly from someone like Judge Thompson made it all the more real. The weight of the situation crashed over her, but she didn't back down. "I won't stop, Judge," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm not afraid of them." The judge shook his head, his expression filled with concern. "Emma, I don't doubt your strength. But you're dealing with people who will stop at nothing to get what they want. They have resources, connections. They can make things happen behind closed doors. And once they're done with you, you won't even be a memory. You'll be erased." Emma's eyes hardened. "I didn't come this far to be erased." The judge sighed, his gaze flicking to the window. "I know, Emma, but you're fighting a system that has existed for decades. These people are entrenched in the very fabric of the legal world. And the more you push, the more they will come after you. I've seen it before. You can't do this alone." Emma stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the judge's words hit her, but she refused to let them break her. "I don't need anyone else, Judge. I've been fighting alone for a long time. I know what I'm up against. And I'm not backing down now." Judge Thompson watched her for a moment, a mixture of admiration and sadness in his eyes. "I don't think you fully understand what you're up against, Emma. These people, they don't just fight with the law. They fight dirty. They play by a different set of rules. And if you keep pushing, you'll end up being just another casualty." Emma felt her resolve harden. "Then let me be that casualty. I'm not afraid of the fight." The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at her for a long time, as if weighing his options. Finally, he stood up, walked to his desk, and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her without a word. "What's this?" Emma asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's information," Judge Thompson said, his voice quieter now. "Information about the people you're up against. If you're going to continue this fight, you'll need to know everything. This will help you." Emma opened the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly as she unfolded the papers inside. There were names, dates, and connections, lists of people who were involved in the corruption she had been fighting against. The more she read, the more she realized just how deep the conspiracy went. This wasn't just about one businessman or a few shady deals. This was a web of corruption that reached all the way to the highest levels of the city's power structure. Judge Thompson's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'm giving you this because I believe in what you're doing. But don't think for a second that it's going to be easy. This is your warning, Emma. Be careful." She looked up at him, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I'm not afraid of them. I'll do whatever it takes to take them down." Judge Thompson's face softened for a moment, but then he turned away, his voice serious once more. "Then I'll be watching. And I'll be waiting for you to prove me wrong." Emma left his chambers with the envelope in hand, her mind racing. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. The people she was up against weren't just criminals. They were entrenched in the very fabric of the city's legal and political systems. They had power, money, and influence. And they weren't going to give up without a fight. But Emma wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. There was too much at stake. The fight for justice wasn't just her battle, it was everyone's. And she would do whatever it took to make sure the truth came out. As she left the courthouse, the weight of what she had learned began to settle in. The path ahead was dangerous, but Emma Daniels wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. The storm was coming, and Emma was ready to face it head-on. The next few days passed in a blur. Emma barely slept, poring over the information Judge Thompson had given her. The names, the connections, the hidden networks of power. Everything was intertwined in ways she hadn't fully realized before. She knew she was up against something bigger than she could have ever imagined. Every step forward felt like she was walking deeper into a maze, one that was carefully constructed by those who had been pulling the strings for years. The envelope had given her the names of some of the most influential people in the city, but it had also left out critical details. Emma felt like she was staring at a puzzle with missing pieces. She knew that if she was going to uncover the truth, she had to dig deeper, uncover more evidence. She couldn't afford to let the pieces slip through her fingers. But with every passing hour, the pressure grew. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages, mostly from her father, offering support, though his concern had grown more apparent with each passing day. He knew what she was getting herself into, and it wasn't just the legal battles he was worried about. It was her safety. Emma had heard his warnings, but she wasn't about to back down now. The law had always been her weapon, and now, more than ever, it was her shield. One evening, as Emma was sitting in her office, going through more legal documents and trying to piece together a strategy, her phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello," she answered, her voice guarded. "Miss Daniels," a cold voice said on the other end. "I think it's time you reconsider your position." Emma froze, her hand tightening around the phone. It was the same type of voice she had been hearing in the anonymous messages, the same calculated tone that sent shivers down her spine. She knew what this was about. "I'm not going to stop," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. "I'll do whatever it takes to bring the truth to light." A small chuckle came through the line. "You have no idea what you're up against. The people you're dealing with, they control everything. And you're nothing but a pawn in their game. A child playing in a world of giants. Don't make the mistake of thinking you can win this." Emma's grip on the phone tightened, her anger flaring. "I'm not a pawn. I'm not afraid of them. And I'm not backing down." The voice on the other end didn't respond immediately. When it did, there was a hint of amusement in the tone. "You'll regret this, Miss Daniels. Just remember, you were warned." Before Emma could respond, the line went dead. She stood up from her desk, pacing the room. The warning had been clear, too clear. But Emma wasn't backing down. Whoever these people were, they had underestimated her. She had already exposed one of the most powerful men in the city, and now she was going after the people who had enabled his corruption. They had tried to intimidate her before, but now they were stepping up their game. And that only made her more determined to fight. She wasn't just fighting for her clients anymore. She was fighting for the very system that had allowed people like Mr. Reynolds and his connections to thrive unchecked. She couldn't let them get away with it. Not now, not ever. Later that evening, Emma decided to take a break from her research. She needed a fresh perspective, and she couldn't afford to wear herself thin. She grabbed her coat, headed out of her office, and took a walk through the city to clear her mind. The night air was cool, the streets almost deserted as the city slowly quieted down. Emma walked aimlessly, lost in thought, trying to put the pieces together in her mind. She had been so focused on the case that she hadn't taken the time to step back and look at the bigger picture. There were people who wanted to silence her, that much was clear. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had something they didn't, truth. And that was something they couldn't take away from her. As she walked, her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out of her pocket, and this time, the message was different. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Asterisk, meet me at the usual place. Midnight. Come alone. Asterisk. The message had no name, no signature. Just a location and a time. Emma's mind raced. The usual place? She knew exactly where that was. It was an old diner in a part of town that wasn't frequented by the public. A place where shady deals had been made for years. She had been there before, but never for a meeting like this. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. But then she realized something. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. The people behind the threats wanted her to be afraid, to hide. But she wasn't going to cower in fear. She would go to the diner, find out what they knew, and get closer to the truth. She couldn't afford to let them control the narrative any longer. With renewed determination, Emma made her way to the diner. The streets were dark, and as she turned onto the alley that led to the entrance, her instincts told her to be on high alert. She couldn't trust anyone, not now, not after the threats she had received. When she stepped inside, the diner was empty except for one person sitting in a booth at the far end. A man, his face obscured by a hat and the shadows. He motioned for her to come over. Emma walked over cautiously, her eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger. When she reached the booth, the man finally spoke. "You've been making waves, Miss Daniels," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "And that's got people worried." Emma didn't sit down. She kept her distance, her hand close to the pocket where she kept her pepper spray. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows the truth about the people you're going after," the man replied, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "You're playing a dangerous game, but I can help you. If you want to bring them down, you need allies. And I'm offering you that." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had expected a confrontation, but this? This was different. "What do you want in return?" The man's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't kind. "Let's just say we both have something to gain here. You want to take down the corrupt, and I want to see them fall. But I need you to trust me." Emma's mind raced. This wasn't a simple offer. This was a game changer. But could she trust him? Was he one of the people who had been threatening her, or was he genuinely trying to help? Before she could respond, the man spoke again. "I'll be in touch. And remember, you're not alone in this fight. But be careful who you trust. Not everyone is as they seem." With that, he stood up and walked out of the diner, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he had appeared. Emma sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. She had been offered an ally, but she didn't know if she could trust him. One thing was certain, though. Things were about to get even more complicated. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Emma couldn't shake the encounter at the diner from her mind. The man, whoever he was, had offered her an ally in the fight against corruption. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with her. She had always trusted her instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling her to be cautious. This man seemed to know too much, and he had shown up at just the right moment, when she was starting to feel the weight of the threats against her. Emma spent the following days in a haze, trying to focus on her cases, but distracted by the growing tension around her. The pressure from the corrupt individuals she had exposed was mounting, and she could feel the walls closing in. Her father had become even more worried, offering to help in ways that would take her away from the front lines, but Emma refused. She wasn't going to back down now. The stakes were too high, and she had already come too far. She spent hours at her desk, combing through the documents Judge Thompson had given her, looking for any new leads or weaknesses she could exploit. But it wasn't just the legal documents that consumed her thoughts. It was the man at the diner. Who was he, and what did he want from her? She had sent him a text message after their meeting, asking for clarification, but there had been no response. The silence only made her more paranoid. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not now. Not even a potential ally. But there was no time to focus on that for too long. She had a case to prepare for, and this one, unlike the others, was personal. It was a class action lawsuit filed by a group of workers who had been wronged by one of the city's largest construction firms. Emma had been following the case for months, collecting evidence and working with the workers to expose the company's illegal practices. Now, it was time to take the fight to court. Emma was in her office early the next morning, preparing her arguments, when she received another unexpected message. This time, it was from an unknown number. Asterisk tonight. Midnight. Same place. Asterisk. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The same man. The diner. What did he want from her now? Emma didn't hesitate. She knew she had to go. She was walking a fine line, balancing her cases and the threat against her life. But if this man knew something she didn't, if he was genuinely trying to help her, she needed to find out. That evening, She left her office later than usual, her mind clouded with thoughts of the mysterious man and what he could reveal. She had made her decision. She would go to the diner once more and hear him out. As she walked through the dimly lit streets, the same feeling of unease washed over her. She tried to shake it off, but it lingered in the back of her mind. Someone was watching her, she could feel it. She kept her head low and her steps quick, trying not to draw attention to herself. When she reached the diner, the familiar neon lights flickered, casting an eerie glow on the empty street. Emma paused at the entrance, her heart racing. The door creaked open as she stepped inside, and the smell of stale coffee and grease filled her nose. There was only one person sitting in the corner booth, the man from before. His face was still hidden in the shadows, but Emma could see his posture, his calm demeanor. She approached the booth cautiously, her instincts still on high alert. "You wanted to talk?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nervous energy that bubbled inside her. The man looked up at her, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "I've been watching you, Miss Daniels," he said calmly. "You're not as careful as you think. They've started making their move. The people who want you gone, they've got their eyes on you now." Emma's stomach churned. She sat down across from him, her hand instinctively resting near the pepper spray in her bag. "What do you know?" she asked, her voice low. "Who are you really?" He chuckled softly, almost as if amused by her question. "Does it really matter?" he replied. "What matters is that I can help you, if you're willing to listen." Emma wasn't sure if she could trust him, but at this point, she didn't have much choice. "Help me with what?" The man leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You've been making waves. People don't like that. They've started moving their pieces on the board. The case you're working on, the one against the construction firm, it's bigger than you think. That company is just one piece of a much larger operation. They've been laundering money through multiple industries. And the people behind them, they're dangerous." Emma's mind raced as he spoke. She had suspected there was more to the case than met the eye. But this was something else. The construction company was just the beginning, and the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it became. "Who's behind it?" she asked, leaning in, her voice barely above a whisper. The man hesitated before speaking again. "I can't tell you everything, but I can give you a name. Richard Donovan. You've heard of him, I'm sure. He's connected to everyone, judges, politicians, CEOs. He's the one who's been orchestrating the whole thing from behind the scenes." Emma's breath caught in her throat. Richard Donovan. The same name that had come up in her research before. He was the one who had been pulling the strings, the one who had been manipulating the system to his advantage. "This doesn't make sense," Emma murmured. "If Donovan is behind all of this, why is he going after me? What does he want?" The man shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Power. Control. You're a threat to that. You've already exposed the tip of the iceberg. But if you keep digging, if you keep pushing, they'll make sure you regret it." Emma stood up suddenly, the weight of the man's words sinking in. "I won't stop," she said, her voice firm. "I've come too far to back down now." The man didn't respond at first, but as Emma turned to leave, he called out to her. "Just remember this, Miss Daniels," he said, his tone grave. "You're playing a game with stakes higher than you realize. And in a game like this, one wrong move could cost you everything." Emma walked out of the diner, the night air colder than it had been before. The danger was real, and the fight ahead would be even harder than she had anticipated. But Emma had never been one to back down from a challenge. The game had changed, and she was ready for it. If you're enjoying this story so far, please make sure you like and subscribe to the channel and help us get to our goal of 1,000 subscribers. Thank you. Emma couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest after the meeting in the diner. The man had given her a name, Richard Donovan, and it had sent a shockwave through her entire being. Donovan was a name that carried weight, a name that had been whispered about in hushed tones, tied to powerful people and untouchable corruption. The fact that he was behind the vast network of criminals she was trying to take down made everything feel like it was now 10 times more dangerous. She sat in her office, the morning light creeping through the blinds, but she felt no warmth from it. Instead, a cold chill ran down her spine as she sifted through the information she had gathered. Donovan's name appeared in many of her documents, but it was always in the background, an afterthought, a shadow. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became that Donovan wasn't just a part of the system. He was the system. He had his hands in everything, from city politics to corporate corruption, and everyone who had ever crossed him had paid the price. But Emma wasn't like everyone else. She wasn't going to cower in fear just because one man had his fingers in the city's pie. She had already risked everything to expose the truth, and she wasn't about to stop now. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized how out of her depth she was. She was up against a man who was untouchable, who had enough influence to make sure anyone who challenged him was silenced. She wasn't just battling a corrupt company anymore. She was up against the very core of the city's power structure. The phone buzzed on her desk, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a text message from her father. "We need to talk. Meet me in an hour. I have something important to show you." Her heart skipped a beat. What could he have found? She had no time to waste. Emma grabbed her things and headed out the door, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. Her father had been working behind the scenes, gathering information on Donovan and the network of corruption that had been plaguing the city for years. Whatever he had discovered, it was urgent. When Emma arrived at her father's office, she found him pacing back and forth. His face was drawn, a look of frustration and concern etched into his features. As soon as he saw her, he motioned for her to sit down. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tense. Martin Daniels didn't waste any time. He handed her a thick file, filled with papers, photographs, and notes. "I've been digging into Donovan's activities, Emma," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "What I found is worse than I imagined." Emma opened the file, flipping through the pages. The information was staggering. Donovan had his hands in every corner of the city, controlling politicians, judges, law enforcement officers, and even corporate executives. He was untouchable, an empire built on corruption and power. And now, Emma realized, Donovan had made her his target. "Dad, this is bigger than I thought," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's controlling everything. No wonder I'm not getting anywhere." Her father nodded, his face grim. "I've been trying to get closer to the heart of his operation, but it's like every time I pull a thread, it leads to another layer of corruption. He's built an empire, and he's protected it with a web of lies. If we want to take him down, we're going to need more than just legal tactics. We'll need leverage." Emma's mind raced. Leverage. She had seen the power that people like Donovan had, the way they could manipulate the system and make sure no one ever uncovered their secrets. But she couldn't back down now. She couldn't let fear paralyze her. "I've been digging into the construction company case, Dad. The deeper I go, the more I find," Emma said, her voice low but determined. "There's something else at play here, and I'm going to expose it. I can't stop now." Martin looked at her, his eyes filled with both pride and fear. "Emma, I know how much this means to you. But you have to understand, this isn't just a legal fight anymore. You're up against people who will do whatever it takes to keep their power. If they're going to come after you, they won't just target your reputation. They'll target your life." Emma clenched her fists, her jaw tight with resolve. "I can't back down. I won't let them win." Her father's expression softened, but there was still worry in his eyes. "I'll help you, Emma. But you need to be careful. We have to find a way to bring Donovan down without getting caught in his trap." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. She knew the stakes were higher than ever, but she wasn't going to let them intimidate her. She would expose the truth, no matter the cost. That evening, Emma sat alone in her office, staring at the file her father had given her. She had more information now, but it wasn't enough. Donovan's network was vast, and she needed to find a way to cut through the web of lies and deceit that surrounded him. She couldn't do it alone. That was when she received an unexpected message on her phone, another anonymous text. "You're digging in the wrong place, Miss Daniels. If you want the truth, you'll need to follow the trail to the real mastermind. Meet me tomorrow night. Midnight. The docks." Emma's pulse quickened. The message was clear. Someone else knew what was really going on. Someone who had information she needed. But who could it be? And why were they willing to help her? She didn't have time to waste. Whoever this was, they could be the key to bringing Donovan down. Emma knew the risks, but she also knew that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. That night, Emma stayed up late, preparing for the meeting. She went over every detail of her plan, how to stay safe, how to protect herself if things went sideways. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. The pieces were falling into place, and she had to be ready to move when the time came. At midnight, Emma made her way to the docks. The air was thick with fog, and the sound of water lapping against the shore echoed in the stillness. She had never been here before, but she knew the area well enough to recognize the isolation it offered. She wasn't sure who she would meet or what they would tell her, but she had no choice but to trust that they had the answers she needed. She scanned the shadows, every sense alert. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. Someone was watching her, but she couldn't see them. A figure appeared in the distance, stepping out from behind a pile of crates. It was the same person who had been watching her at the diner. The man spoke, his voice low and urgent. "You're digging too deep, Miss Daniels. But I can help you. I know where to find the information you're looking for, and I'm willing to give it to you. But you have to understand the risks. If you move forward, there's no turning back." Emma's heart raced. This was it. The truth was within her reach. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. The man nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Then follow me, and be prepared for what you'll find." Emma followed the man through the foggy docks, her heart pounding as the night air seemed to grow colder with every step. She kept her senses sharp, aware of every sound and every movement in the shadows. Whoever this man was, he knew more about the case than anyone else. But the risks of trusting him were high. She had no idea who he truly was or what his motives were, but at this point, she couldn't afford to be cautious. She had already come too far, and this might be the break she needed. The man led her to a small, decrepit warehouse tucked away in the corner of the docks. The building looked abandoned, the windows dark and grimy. He stopped in front of the heavy metal door, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. "Stay close," he muttered, unlocking the door with a quiet click. "We don't have much time." Emma stepped inside, the musty air hitting her as she entered the dimly lit warehouse. It smelled like rust and old wood, and the only sound was the faint echo of footsteps as they moved deeper into the building. The man led her through a narrow hallway and into a small room at the back, where an old desk sat, cluttered with papers, files, and a dusty computer. "Sit down," the man said, motioning to the chair in front of the desk. He grabbed a file from one of the piles of paper and slid it across the desk to her. Emma hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She reached for the file, her hands trembling slightly. As she opened it, her eyes scanned the pages quickly, her breath catching in her throat. The information inside was staggering: names, dates, connections, and financial records that tied Richard Donovan to a massive network of criminal activity. It wasn't just the construction company anymore. It was a whole operation, one that spanned multiple industries, from real estate and construction to illegal gambling and money laundering. "This is everything," the man said, his voice low. "This is how they've been operating all these years. Donovan isn't just a businessman. He's the head of an entire criminal syndicate. He's been pulling the strings for years, and the system has turned a blind eye." Emma's mind raced as she absorbed the information. She had suspected that Donovan was involved in something bigger, but she hadn't realized just how far his influence stretched. He had his hands in nearly every major industry, and no one had dared challenge him. Until now. "Why are you helping me?" Emma asked, looking up from the file. The question had been burning on her mind since the moment they met, but she had been too focused on the information to ask it sooner. The man's expression hardened. "I don't care about your fight for justice, Miss Daniels," he said bluntly. "But I do care about taking Donovan down. He's been running things for too long, and I've got my reasons for wanting him gone. Let's just say that I'm not the only one who wants to see him fall. There are others who can't act directly, but they want the same thing you do." Emma leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What do you want from me? What's the catch?" The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a calculated, knowing smile. "I want you to use the information. Use it to expose Donovan. I don't care how you do it, but I need him to be taken down. If you're serious about this, then you'll do whatever it takes." Emma stared at him, trying to read his expression, but it was impossible to tell what he was truly thinking. Was he trying to use her? Or was he genuinely on her side? "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steady, though there was an edge to it. He shrugged, seemingly unfazed. "Then you'll be left in the dark, Miss Daniels. You'll be fighting a battle you'll never win. Donovan won't just make sure you lose your cases. He'll make sure you disappear." Emma clenched her jaw. She didn't like the feeling of being cornered, but she knew he was right. If she was going to take Donovan down, she needed leverage. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She had no choice but to take it. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. "But you have to promise me something. If I'm going to trust you, I need to know who you really are. I'm not going to work with someone who's hiding in the shadows." The man hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small business card. He slid it across the table to Emma. "You can call me Victor," he said. "And that's all you need to know for now." Emma took the card, but her eyes remained fixed on his face. Victor, I need more than that. Who do you really work for? He leaned back in his chair, his eyes flashing with something unreadable. I'm just a man with a plan, Miss Daniels. Let's leave it at that for now. But know this, there are others who want Donovan out of the picture. And if you're willing to go through with this, we'll make sure you have all the resources you need. But you need to stay focused. You can't afford to get distracted. Emma thought for a moment, weighing the offer. She had already come this far, and she wasn't going to back down now. She needed Donovan to fall, and this man Victor might just be the key. But something about him still made her uneasy. She didn't trust him completely, but for now, she had no choice. I'm in, she said, her voice steady. Victor nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Good. Then let's get to work. He stood up, picking up the file from the desk and slipping it back into the folder. I'll be in touch soon. There's a lot of ground to cover, and we don't have much time. Emma stood up as well, her mind swirling with the enormity of what lay ahead. Taking down Donovan wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be without risk. But now she had the information she needed, and she had a new ally. However reluctant she was to trust him completely. As she left the warehouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking down a path that would change everything. The stakes were higher now, and there was no turning back. But Emma Daniels had never been one to back down from a challenge. And this was the biggest challenge of her life. The days following her meeting with Victor were filled with a sense of urgency. Emma had the tools she needed to take down Richard Donovan, but the pressure was mounting. She couldn't ignore the constant sense of being watched, the subtle signs that her every move was being tracked. As she sat at her desk, going over the information Victor had provided her, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but something still didn't feel right. Her phone buzzed, and Emma glanced at the screen. It was a text from her father. Meet me at the office. It's urgent. Her pulse quickened. She hadn't told him about the meeting with Victor yet. He would want to know everything, but Emma wasn't sure how much she could tell him. Her father had been supportive from the start, but she knew that the stakes were now higher than ever. Donovan was a dangerous man, and the deeper she went, the more she realized just how far his influence stretched. She grabbed her coat and made her way to her father's office, her mind racing with the possibilities. When she arrived, Martin was already waiting for her. His face was grim, and his usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a look of deep concern. "Dad, what's going on?" Emma asked, sitting down across from him. Martin didn't waste any time. "I've been hearing rumors, Emma. Word is getting out. People in the legal community are starting to talk. Your recent victories, they've drawn a lot of attention, but it's not the kind of attention we want." Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "Donovan's people are coming for you," her father said bluntly. "And they're using everything at their disposal to make sure you don't win. They've been talking to judges, trying to get your cases dismissed. They've been pressuring law enforcement. And I've even heard they're trying to find dirt on you. If they can't ruin your reputation, they'll do worse." Emma sat back in her chair, trying to process the gravity of what her father was saying. She knew it would get dangerous, but hearing it from him made it all the more real. Her fight wasn't just about winning cases anymore. It was about survival. "Dad, I'm not backing down," Emma said, her voice firm. "I'm going after Donovan, and I won't stop until he's brought to justice." Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with both pride and fear. "I know you won't, but you need to be careful. This isn't just about you anymore. It's about everyone you care about. They'll use whatever they can to break you. They'll target people close to you. They'll stop at nothing." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I can handle it, Dad. I've been fighting this system for a long time. And now, I'm finally close to bringing it all down." Martin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You've always been strong, Emma. But this fight, it's bigger than both of us. I just want you to be prepared. You're dealing with people who have more power than we can even imagine." "I've already seen the power they wield," Emma said, her voice determined. "And I'm not afraid. I've got the evidence I need. I just need to put it all together." Martin paused, then leaned forward. "There's one more thing you need to know, Emma. I've been doing some digging of my own. Donovan's network isn't just built on money, it's built on control. He has people in positions of power, not just in the legal world, but in the government. If we're going to bring him down, we'll need more than just legal evidence. We'll need to expose the entire system he's created." Emma's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean? What kind of control does he have?" "I've been hearing whispers," Martin continued, his voice low. Donovan has people in high places, judges, politicians, even law enforcement officers. He's built a network of corruption that stretches across every corner of the city. And he's not just using money to buy influence. He's using blackmail, intimidation, and fear. If we're going to take him down, we need to expose not just his crimes, but the entire system he's been controlling. Emma felt the weight of her father's words settle over her. This wasn't just about one man. This was about an entire system that had been corrupt for years, a system that had been protected by people in power. The truth wasn't just hidden in documents. It was buried beneath layers of fear and manipulation. "Do you think we can do it?" Emma asked, her voice soft. Her father's eyes met hers, filled with determination. "I believe we can, but we need to be careful. We're not just fighting Donovan anymore. We're fighting an entire network of people who will stop at nothing to protect their interests. If we're going to bring him down, we need to be smart. We need to play the game on our terms." Emma nodded, a new sense of resolve filling her. She had been fighting for justice for so long, but now it felt like she was fighting for something even bigger. She wasn't just challenging corruption, she was challenging an entire system. And she wasn't about to let it stand. Later that night, Emma sat alone in her office, going through the files she had gathered. The weight of the case, of everything that was at stake, pressed heavily on her shoulders. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. If she was going to take down Donovan, she needed to be prepared for everything. Her phone buzzed again, and she looked down at the screen. Another message from Victor. "Meet me tomorrow night. I have more information. You're getting closer to the truth, but there's more you need to know. Be ready." Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. She had been waiting for this. She had been waiting for the final pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Tomorrow night, she would meet Victor again. And this time, she would be ready. As she stood up from her desk, she glanced at the city skyline outside her window. The lights were dim, but she knew that the storm was coming. And this time, she was going to be at the center of it. She wasn't backing down. She couldn't. The following day was a blur of preparation. Emma barely slept the night before, her mind racing with everything she had uncovered. The more she thought about Donovan and his network of corruption, the more it became clear this wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a battle against a deeply entrenched system that would do whatever it took to maintain control. By midday, Emma had reviewed every detail in the case, and she was ready to meet Victor again. She knew that he held the final pieces of the puzzle, the last bit of information she needed to expose Donovan completely. Her nerves were taut, but her resolve was stronger than ever. She had come too far to back down now. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father, just as she was about to leave for the meeting. "I'm worried, Emma. Be careful tonight. These people are dangerous." She paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen. She knew he was right. The danger was real, but she couldn't afford to stop now. Emma texted him back. "I'll be careful, Dad. I promise. I'm closer than ever to bringing them down." With that, she grabbed her coat and left her apartment, determined to meet Victor and get the final pieces of information she needed. The city felt different as she walked through the streets. The air was heavy with tension, and the darkened alleyways and quiet corners seemed to hide secrets waiting to be uncovered. As she approached the familiar diner where she had met Victor the last time, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something much bigger than she had anticipated. The diner's neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow on the pavement. Emma entered cautiously, glancing around before walking toward the back booth where she had last met Victor. He was already there, sitting in the same spot, his face shadowed by his hat. His expression was unreadable as she approached. "You came," he said simply, his voice low. "Good." Emma sat down across from him, the familiar sense of unease creeping in. "I've been waiting for this," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Tell me everything." Victor slid a thick envelope across the table toward her. Emma opened it quickly, her heart pounding as she looked at the contents. Inside were photographs, financial records, and a list of names, some familiar, some new. The documents painted a clear picture of how deeply Donovan had woven his influence into the city's infrastructure. He hadn't just bribed a few people. He had infiltrated every part of the system, controlling everything from the courts to law enforcement, to the very businesses that shaped the city. "This is it," Emma whispered, scanning the papers. "This is everything I need." Victor nodded. "It's all there. Donovan's network, his money laundering, the people he's paid off, the way he's tied up with every major player in this city. You have what you need now. But you have to be careful. He won't stop until you're gone. Emma looked up at him, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean by that? What's the next move? You need to expose him. Publicly, Victor said, leaning forward. But you have to be smart. There are too many people on his payroll. If you try to do it too quickly, they'll close in on you before you can even act. You need to gather more support, more people who know about him. Only then can you go public. But if you expose him without the proper backup, he'll silence you, no matter how much evidence you have. Emma nodded, her mind already racing through the next steps. She had the information. Now she needed to make sure she had the power and the protection to back it up. She couldn't do this alone anymore. She needed allies, people who were willing to stand with her, even if it meant going up against the most powerful people in the city. Victor stood up, his shadow looming over the table. I've done what I can to help you, Miss Daniels. But now, it's up to you to finish it. You've got the truth, but the truth won't matter if no one believes it. You need to make them believe it. Emma looked up at him, determination burning in her chest. I will. I'm not backing down. I'll bring Donovan down, and I'll bring his whole network with him. Victor didn't reply. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door, disappearing into the darkness as silently as he had arrived. Emma stayed seated for a moment, taking a deep breath as she absorbed the weight of everything she had just learned. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for so long. The final confrontation. She had everything she needed to expose Donovan, to bring him down for good. But there was still so much at stake, her career, her safety, and the lives of those who had helped her along the way. She couldn't do this without them. She stood up, taking the envelope with her, her mind made up. The pieces were in place, but now she had to act. The next morning, Emma met with her father again. They had a long discussion about the next steps, about how to expose Donovan's network without putting everyone in danger. They knew it wouldn't be easy. The corruption ran too deep, and Donovan's reach was too vast. But together, they could do it. We'll need the right allies, Martin said, his voice low. You're not alone in this, Emma. There are people who want him gone too. Emma nodded, feeling a sense of hope for the first time in days. She had allies, and she wasn't going to back down. She was going to take down Donovan, and she was going to expose everything he had built. Later that night, Emma prepared the files, everything she had uncovered about Donovan and his network, and made arrangements to meet with the journalists who had agreed to help her. She knew this would be the beginning of the end for Donovan. Once the truth came to light, there would be no going back. As she walked into the meeting with the journalists, she felt a surge of confidence. The truth was powerful, and with the right people behind her, she could bring Donovan down. It wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about exposing a corrupt system that had been allowed to operate unchecked for far too long. The storm was coming, but Emma Daniels was ready for it. The following week felt like a whirlwind for Emma. Every day, the weight of what she was about to do pressed heavier on her shoulders. She had everything in place, the evidence, the allies, the plan. Now, all that remained was to expose Richard Donovan and bring down his empire of corruption once and for all. Emma knew the risks. She had seen firsthand how far Donovan would go to protect himself. But this time, she wasn't going to let him get away with it. She had come too far, and too many people had suffered because of him. This wasn't just about justice for her. It was about justice for everyone who had been wronged by him. It was the night before the story was set to break. Emma sat alone in her office, her mind racing. She had spent the entire day going over the details one last time. The journalists she had worked with were ready to publish the story, but Emma knew the moment they did, everything would change. The risk of retaliation was enormous, but she couldn't back out now. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her father. Be careful, Emma. They won't take this lying down. No matter what happens, know I'm proud of you. Her father's words hit her hard. She had always known he would support her, but seeing those words of pride and concern made her realize just how much was at stake. She wasn't just fighting for justice. She was fighting for the future, for a city that deserved to be free of corruption. And she had made the decision to stand up, no matter the cost. Emma put her phone down and stood up, looking out the window at the city skyline. The lights twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness she was about to expose. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She wasn't just going to expose Donovan's crimes. She was going to start a movement. People were going to rise up, and the system was going to change. The world had been built on lies, but Emma was ready to tear it all down. The next morning, Emma met with the journalists one final time. They were nervous, too. The story they were about to publish would shake the very foundations of the city. But they were all committed to the cause. Together, they were about to take down a man who had gotten away with so much for so long. "We're ready," one of the journalists said, a determined look in their eyes. "We've double-checked everything. This story is solid." Emma nodded, a sense of calm washing over her. She was ready. "Do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "Make sure it's everywhere. I want the world to know the truth." The journalists got to work immediately, finalizing the details and preparing to release the article. Emma stayed in the background, her heart racing. She knew the moment the story went live, everything would change. Donovan's people would come for her. But she wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. As the hours passed, Emma's phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from her father, her colleagues, and even a few friends. Word was spreading about the story, and there was no turning back. The tension in the air was palpable. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, but now that it was finally here, she couldn't help but feel the gravity of it all. At exactly 6 p.m., the story went live. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she checked her phone and saw the headline. "Unmasking the Truth. Inside Richard Donovan's Web of Corruption." The article laid out everything. Donovan's ties to criminal organizations, his manipulation of the city's legal system, his illicit dealings with corporations and politicians. The evidence Emma had uncovered was clear and irrefutable. The world was about to know the truth, and there was no way Donovan could escape now. For a moment, Emma felt a rush of relief. But it was short-lived. Almost immediately, her phone started ringing nonstop. She could see the name flashing on the screen, unknown caller. Then the text messages started rolling in, one after another. Some were supportive, others threatening. "You don't know what you've done. You've made a grave mistake, Miss Daniels. This isn't over. We will come for you." The messages were clear, and they didn't stop. Donovan's people were already mobilizing, and Emma knew it was only a matter of time before they came after her. She grabbed her coat and headed to her father's office. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to make sure he was safe. Everyone she cared about was in danger now. When she arrived, she found her father already waiting for her, a grim expression on his face. "It's begun, hasn't it?" he said, looking at her as she walked through the door. Emma nodded, trying to keep her composure. "They've already seen the article. They're not happy. I need to make sure we're ready for what's coming next." Her father nodded, standing up and walking toward the desk. "You did the right thing, Emma. We both know that. But you're right to be worried. This won't be easy. We can't let them get away with it," Emma said, her voice tight with determination. "They've hurt too many people. They think they can scare me, but they're wrong. We're going to take them down. All of them." Her father looked at her with a mix of pride and concern. "You've got the truth on your side, Emma. But the fight is just beginning. We need to be ready. And we need to have each other's backs." Emma felt a sense of relief wash over her. No matter what happened next, she wasn't alone. Her father was with her. The journalists had her back. And together, they would stand against the powerful forces that had controlled the city for so long. But even as the weight of the battle ahead settled in, Emma felt a spark of hope. The truth had been exposed, and now the city was watching. Donovan's empire was on the brink of crumbling. She had done what no one thought was possible, and she had started something that couldn't be stopped. The storm was coming, but Emma Daniels was ready to face it head-on.